Where's your proof?
Sure.
What do you know about Bram Stoker and his knowledge of Vlad Dracula and Vlad the Impaler? Because obviously, at a certain point in film history, the connection was made much closer than what Bram has actually used in his novel. I think the Dracula Untold with Luke Evans actually is the movie surrounded all about how Vlad the Impaler chose to become a vampire to defend his people from the Turks. The 1992 Coppola movie, the first 4 to 5 minutes, it's all about excuse me, all about Vlad the Impaler, who was rebelling against the church because his wife committed suicide and couldn't be buried in a consecrated graveyard. Bram Stoker's much, his novel is much more elusive. There is not a lot of information about where Count Dracula in Bram's novel becomes a vampire. And a lot, the stuff that we do know that he referenced was a place called the Sholomons, which is a sort of mythical school of the dark arts in Transylvania that Bram picked up from this 2-volume books from Emily Gerard, a Scottish lady who wrote and was living in Transylvania when she wrote all about Transylvanian superstitions, all about vampires, all the superstitions surrounding them, the snaking of the heart, the garlic, all that kind of stuff. That's Emily Gerard, and we can see that. He's mentioned it in his notes, and we now know those 2 books are in the London Library. I've purchased the same editions, and you read it all there. But Emily Gerard does not talk about Vlad the Impaler. This is all the superstitions that Bram attaches to this real count that he read about in 2 books. And he just happened to go to Whitby in the beginning, near the very beginning of the summer of 1890, when he was writing the novel Dracula. We know from his notes that he started just a month or 2 before that, and he was beginning to set the story in Austria. He was going to have the Count arrive into Dover, but when he went to Whitby on a holiday with his wife and son, he wandered into the Whitby subscription library and checked out a book called The Principles of Wallachia, Moldavia by William Wilkinson, and it had a specific entry in it that he copied into his notes. So, if he copied something into his notes, we know it caught his eye. It mentioned that the Wallachians were at this time, as they are at present, used to using the name Dracula for somebody associated, being showing cruel actions or cunning, and it means the devil. We also know it means dragon later on, but Wilkinson didn't mention that. So he's connected in this book to a devil. So at that time, I believe it caught Bram's eye because he had been watching Henry Irving playing the role of Mephistopheles, this devil creature, in the play Faust, and everything about Dracula was the occult, and this was going on in Victorian society. Is interested in the occult and all these sort of occult practices. So Bram was latching onto a devil, and he saw this in his book by Wilkinson. Then he gets back to London and goes to the London Library, and sure enough, there's another book in there by a guy called James Samuelson, who goes into more detail. And this is a game changer, Rick, because my friends who are the scholars, Miller and Desang, who wrote the notes, there was only one little mention of Samuelson's book in the Dracula notes, but it was enough to point out that Bram was reading this book and that he was interested in this writer who was also a lawyer, but he was a traveler, and he traveled around and wrote these very factual books. And he mentioned about Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, being known as the devil, and he mentioned a lot of wars and battles that he fought. So this book by Samuelson is a bit of a game changer because it does help us with the argument that Bram Stoker knew more than was just previously known in the Wilkinson book, that Dracula means devil, that we now know the backstories. So it makes sense when you read the novel Dracula and you can see all the references that Bram has made to the backstory that Dracula boasts to Jonathan Harker about, back in the old days, I did this, and the blood of Attila goes through my veins. And so we now know he gets that from not only the Samuelson book, but the Major Johnson book and the Charles Bonner book, that other things in the London Library were steeped in this history of the battles between the Austrian-Hungarians and the Ottomans and the Wallachians and the Transylvanians, all this sort of mixture of battles and superstitions all mixed into one. Bram just took all this stuff and made what I call his Dracula soup. This mixture of stuff that creates a mythical creature, but with a lot of factual background. And that's the key, is so that people would realize, oh yeah, I've heard of that guy, but I didn't realize he was a vampire, or I didn't realize he was a real guy, or he was from here. Yeah. There's enough reality to create what they call the willful suspension of disbelief. And that was enough for Bram to, again, just like I said earlier, to make the story seem real and realistic enough to get people's attention.
Gotcha. That's incredible. There's so much history, of course, with Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Impaler, and all this, and obviously Bram really studied that as meticulously as he's studied anything, to the point where you would think he'd been to Transylvania and all he did was study the heck out of it and immerse himself in that research, that he would have very thoroughly researched everything there was to research regarding Vlad, but yet he only took just a small smidgen of that research to, I guess, influence the name Dracula, as well as the hints of Dracula's background, without actually going too much into detail. But that made such a huge difference, in the book, where you can picture Dracula as previously being this, great almighty warlord and ruler of all these lands, and an incredible warrior, with, again, just a little smidgen of the history that he took from all of his research. I think is just incredible the way that Bram applied that.
He also applied the name out of this Wilkinson and Samuelson book, Dracula, up until this point. We've seen in his notes, and we reference this in our annotated Dracula.
Yeah, he
was going to call his count Wampyr, or Vampyr, Wampyr, which is Austrian for a vampire. This is where he was originally going to set the story. And I say this and I kind of have to roll my eyes, and I'm sure you'll do the same. Imagine the name Vampyr instead of Dracula. It just doesn't have that, iconic bite to it. Dracula.
Yes.
If it wasn't, who knows if he would have had the success or the longevity with sort of a wimpy name like Wampyr.
Yeah, so, womp womp.
yeah, and we don't, so we're okay. We don't have to.
Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video as much as I hope you did, please consider hitting the like button so that this could reach out to more people like yourselves. Really appreciate that. And if you want to keep in touch with the channel, please also consider subscribing and hitting that notification button. Thanks so much. We'll see you on the next one. And while you're waiting for the next one, why not check out this video? Because that's the one that YouTube thinks that you're going to like next. Have a great day. Stay dark. Stay well. Stay hungry.